What happens when a high-performing strategist gets her rewards stolen by the very boss who took credit for her work? Meet Madison Reed, sharp, relentless, and done being overlooked. When a stolen Super Bowl ticket sparks a corporate reckoning, Madison doesn't get angry. She gets strategic. This isn't about revenge. It's about power reclaimed. Subscribe now for more bold, true to life stories of women who don't just survive the system, they outsmart it. Don't miss what happens next. I'd been running on caffeine and sheer determination for nearly 5 months. Late nights, early mornings, weekends sacrificed in front of spreadsheets instead of spent with friends, all for one massive project that had the potential to redefine not only my career, but the firm's entire standing in the market. And I nailed it. A logistics tech giant headquartered in Austin was ecstatic. The pitch, flawless. The modeling, bulletproof. The presentation, I delivered it alone, with zero support from senior partners who were too busy golfing with investors in Scottsdale. It closed a multi-million-dollar deal. But the best part wasn't the bonus or the metrics. It was the email I received at 8:13 a.m. on Friday. Subject line, "Thank you," and a small token of appreciation. It was from the client's CEO who wrote, "Madison, you went above and beyond. Your preparation, insight, and professionalism set a new standard. As a personal thank you, not the firm's yours. Please enjoy these." Attached was a PDF confirmation, 2 Super Bowl tickets, front row, 40-yard line, with premium hospitality access. My breath caught in my throat. I reread the email 3 times. I had never been to the Super Bowl before. Growing up in a football, obsessed Ohio household, it had always been a dream. Sunday games were family ritual. My dad had painted our garage door in Brown's colors. And here it was, the golden ticket, the reward for months of grind. The firm's concierge had routed the tickets to the regional office, and under protocol, high-value gifts were held for compliance purposes. That meant Blake Corbin, regional managing partner, senior bloward, and the living embodiment of corporate entitlement, had physical possession of them. Fine. I imagined he'd stroll in, flash that rare smile he reserved for billion-dollar closings, and say, "Nice work, Madison," before handing them over. Except that moment never came. 3 days passed. Then on Tuesday, Blake walked into my office without knocking, no eye contact, just his usual air of bored authority. He leaned on the edge of my desk like he owned the building and said, "Madison, heard you had a little win." I nodded, trying to suppress a grin. "Yeah. Really appreciate the opportunity." He tilted his head, like he was about to explain something I couldn't possibly understand. "You did well," he said. "Which brings me to the tickets." My pulse quickened. "Right," I replied, waiting for him to hand them over. Instead, he gave a sigh. "See? Clients don't always understand internal hierarchy. When they give gifts like this, it's more of a gesture to the firm than to a single employee." I froze. The email specifically said it was a personal thank you, addressed to me. He waved it off like I'd mispronounced a wine label. Sure. But from a compliance standpoint, it's still corporate. And in this business, we make decisions that benefit long-term relationships. He paused, then added casually, "I've already arranged to take a potential investor. It's a strategic play." My jaw clenched. Months of work, sleepless nights, canceled weekends, solo calls while others left early. And he was stealing my reward for strategy. I stayed composed. "That doesn't seem fair," I said, voice tight but measured. The client made it clear those tickets were a gift to me. Blake smiled like I was a child arguing bedtime. "Be grateful you have a seat at the table, Madison. That's the real reward." He stood up, patted my desk like I was a Labrador, and said, "I'm sure there'll be plenty of other opportunities." I smiled. Not a real one. The kind of smile that hides teeth. "Enjoy the game," I said. He grinned, satisfied, and walked out of my office as if he'd done me a favor. He had no idea what was coming. As soon as the door shut behind him, The smile vanished. My fingers curled into fists beneath the desk, my nails digging into my palms. Blake Corbin thought he could take credit, take perks, take anything he wanted because he was at the top. What he didn't realize was Monday wouldn't be the start of another work week. It would be the beginning of his unraveling. The moment Blake left my office, I closed the email from the client and pulled it back up. Reading it again, every word branded into my brain. A personal thank you. Just for you. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. And yet Blake had twisted it, hijacked it, and now strutted through the halls acting like he'd earned it. But I wasn't going to let emotion make my decisions. No raised voices. No emails I'd regret. No HR complaints that would quietly vanish into a black hole. I was going to let Blake destroy himself, and I already had the first thread to pull. I composed a text to the client, casual, strategic, just enough. Hi. Just wanted to say thank you again for the amazing Super Bowl tickets. Truly meant a lot that you thought of me. Funny enough, turns out they were given to someone else here. No worries, just wanted to keep you in the loop. Hope to catch up soon. I hit send. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed. What? Muhat? Who took them? I replied, I don't actually know. I just never received them. It's okay though. I appreciate the gesture more than anything. His response came instantly. No. This is not okay. Those were for Yo-Yo. Let me handle this. Say nothing for now. I stared at the screen, the corner of my mouth curling. It wasn't about the tickets anymore. It was about what they represented. Recognition, respect, integrity, and Blake had stolen it in broad daylight. Now he'd face consequences, and not from me, from the client. I spent the rest of the day quietly gathering intel. Blake couldn't help but brag, and I knew he'd drop clues. Sure enough, by lunchtime, I heard him in the break room, holding court like a politician at a fundraiser. Front row. 40-yard line. Hospitality suite. Taking a whale prospect. It's going to be massive for us, he was saying. I stayed behind the corner, out of sight, biting back a grin. His arrogance was a weapon, and he was wielding it with no idea he'd already stepped on the landmine. By Friday, he was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Left early to catch a flight. To Vegas, as he called it. Never mind the game was in Phoenix. Details weren't his thing. I smiled at him as he passed by my desk. Big plans, I asked, voice perfectly polite. He smirked. Just making moves. I nodded. Well, enjoy the game. And I meant it. Because by the time he landed, the trap would already be set. On Saturday, I received a message from the client. Monday, 9:30 am. I've arranged a meeting. Play it cool. Trust me. Oh, I trusted him. I spent Sunday doing absolutely nothing. No football, no anxiety, no pacing. Just a long walk through Central Park and a glass of wine on the balcony. I was calm. Ready. Monday morning, 9:07 a.m. Blake strutted into the office, wearing sunglasses indoors, Starbucks in hand, radiating the smug energy of a man who thought he'd pulled off the con of the century. I sipped my coffee at my desk, not even looking up. When the 9:30 calendar invite popped up, client review mandatory. Conference room I clicked accept, grabbed my tablet, and walked in. Blake was already seated at the head of the glass-walled conference room, legs crossed, confident as ever. That confidence cracked slightly when the client walked in, accompanied by a sharp-dressed woman I didn't recognize. The client introduced her calmly. Blake, this is Andrea Holloway, VP of Corporate Partnerships. Andrea gave a curt nod. Blake blinked. Pleasure, he said, voice a touch too high. Then the client turned to me and said, Madison, did you enjoy the game? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. I blinked innocently. The game? The Super Bowl, he clarified. I sent you 2 tickets. I shook my head. I didn't attend. The temperature in the room dropped. Andrea leaned forward. Blake, who did go? He opened his mouth, scrambled for a lie, and the unraveling began. Blake hesitated, clearly scrambling for a name that wouldn't get him fired. I took a prospective investor, he said finally, but the words came out too quickly, too rehearsed. The client leaned back, folding his arms. Ooh, Blake blinked. Excuse me? Who exactly did you take to the Super Bowl? Andrea's voice was calm, but there was a warning in it. Blake's throat moved as he swallowed.
It was?
It was someone we've been in talks with. From the West Coast. A private equity firm. The lie sounded like it had been patched together mid-sentence. The client nodded slowly, then turned to Andrea. Is there a record of that? Expense reports, meeting confirmations. Andrea tapped on her tablet. Not that I've seen. Her eyes flicked back to Blake. Did you charge the flight, hotel, and tickets to the firm's account? The silence answered for him. Blake, the client said, his tone sharper now. Those tickets were a personal gift, not a business tool. They were meant to reward the person who did the actual work, Madison. And instead, you handed them off to someone else without permission. Blake sat forward, trying to regain control. Look, I understand how this looks, but I was acting in the best interest of the firm. This was a business development opportunity. No, it was theft. Andrea interrupted. You knowingly rerouted a gift from an employee to yourself, used company funds to support a personal outing, and misrepresented your actions to both the firm and the client. That's not business development, Blake. That's misconduct. He looked around the room, but there were no allies waiting to rescue him. I stayed silent, watching it unfold. I didn't gloat. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Blake was doing all the damage himself. The client exhaled. I was genuinely looking forward to seeing Madison at that game. It was a way to say thank you, to show respect for the effort she put into saving our account. But instead, she was left in the dark, while you pretended her work was yours. Blake opened his mouth to speak, but Andrea lifted her hand. Effective immediately, she said. You're on administrative leave pending a formal internal review. You'll need to hand over all firm assets and vacate your office by end of day. Blake stood slowly, color drained from his face. He tried one last Hail Mary. This is a misunderstanding. I've given this firm 12 years. And in one weekend. Andrea said without emotion. You jeopardized everything. Without another word, Blake walked out. His shoulders were square, but his gait was shaky. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was electric. The client turned to me. I'm sorry you were put in that position. You deserved better. I nodded, steady. Thank you. Andrea smiled faintly and slid a folder across the table. Since you've been leading this account in all but title, it's time the title matched the work. I opened it. A promotion. A significant raise. A formal recognition of the role I'd already been doing. My name in bold, under Senior Strategy Director. I took a slow breath. I accept. The client smiled. Glad to hear it. And next time I have Super Bowl tickets, they'll come straight to your inbox. That made me laugh. A quiet, relieved laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Monday morning had started like any other, but by noon, Blake Corbin was gone, and I had everything he'd tried to keep from me. I stood, shook hands with both of them, and walked out of that room with my head high and my spine straight. The whispers began before I even reached my desk, coworkers exchanging glances, Slack messages pinging, and Blake's office? Already being cleared out by HR. He had stolen credit, stolen recognition, and thought he could get away with it. Instead, he handed me everything I had earned, and more. An hour later, just as I was beginning to breathe again, the HR email hit my inbox like a slap. Subject line, mandatory meeting, immediate attendance required. No explanation, just a room number and the time. 15 minutes from now. I knew what this was. Blake wasn't going quietly. He was going to make one last play to twist the narrative, claw his way back from the consequences of his own arrogance by trying to drag me down with him. I gathered my notes, smoothed my blazer, and walked to the HR conference room with steady, deliberate steps. Inside, Denise from HR looked up nervously from a stack of folders. Across from her sat Blake. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked hunted. But he still tried to conjure that same performative calm. "Madison," he said, feigning concern. "This isn't personal. But I have to bring up a serious issue."
I sat.
"Witches." Denise cleared her throat awkwardly. "Blake has raised a concern that you may have violated the firm's confidentiality policy by discussing internal matters with a client." I turned slowly toward Blake. "Are you talking about the Super Bowl tickets?" He nodded once. "Yes. That was a firm issue. Internal allocation. You disclosed it externally. I couldn't help it." I actually laughed. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakably incredulous. "Let me get this straight. You took tickets that were personally addressed to me, reassigned them to yourself, and now you're calling it an internal allocation. And when the client asked about it, I told him I never received them. That's the violation you're citing?" Blake's jaw twitched. "You undermined the firm's process." Denise looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Madison," she said carefully, "can you confirm that no confidential strategy, financial, or client data was shared?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "I answered a question. I didn't volunteer anything beyond what the client himself initiated. I didn't leak financials, client strategies, or anything that remotely fits under protected communication. And the only reason this is even being brought up is because Blake was publicly held accountable, and now he's grasping at straws." Denise turned to Blake. We reviewed the email trail. The client asked a direct question about the tickets, which he had personally gifted. Madison's response was factual and appropriate. Blake's face flushed red. "So that's it. She just gets away with it." Denise looked him dead in the eye. "No. You're the one under investigation. You're the one who misappropriated a gift, missold the client, and expensed the entire trip as a business expense when it was clearly personal. You put this firm at legal and reputational risk. Madison did nothing wrong." He sat back, deflated. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the way he had leaned against my desk, told me I should be grateful for a job, and patted my hand like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. I stood. "Are we done here?" Denise nodded. "Yes, thank you, Madison." As I walked out, Blake didn't say a word. He couldn't. His last move had failed. Completely. By the time I got back to my desk, a company-wide email had gone out. Effective immediately, Blake Corbin is no longer with the firm. We thank him for his service and wish him well. I stared at it for a moment, letting it land. His name was already scrubbed from the internal system. His office was locked. His email shut off. In less than 72 hours, Blake had gone from the firm's golden boy to a footnote. And me, I was exactly where I was meant to be. No shortcuts, no stolen credit. Just undeniable, documented value. And best of all, I'd won without ever raising my voice. The air in the office felt different after the announcement. People walked a little slower past my desk, throwing side glances like I'd become some sort of legend overnight. Whispers followed me into the kitchen, into the hallway, into the elevator. No one said anything directly, but the shift in energy was unmistakable. Equal parts admiration, curiosity, and that very particular kind of relief that happens when someone stands up to power and survives. I kept my head down, responded to emails, ran the client follow-ups as if nothing seismic had happened. The congratulatory Slack messages trickled in subtle emojis, one-liners like, "Well played," and "Nicely done." Even a few quiet pats on the back from colleagues who'd previously barely spoken to me. I didn't gloat. I didn't engage in office gossip. I just kept doing the job the firm had no choice but to finally acknowledge I'd been doing all along. That afternoon, as I was reviewing final numbers on the quarter's deliverables, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Madison Reed," said a familiar voice on the other end. It was the client. the one whose account had triggered this entire chain of events. "I assume you've heard the news," I said lightly. He chuckled. "Oh, I've heard. And I'm calling with a question." I waited. "Are you happy staying where you are?" I paused. "Define happy?" "Let me be blunt," he said. "I don't trust your firm. I tolerated them because I trusted you. You built this project, not Blake. You made it a success, not the firm's name on the door. And the only reason you got the promotion was because a scandal forced their hand. So I'm asking, what if you left?" My heart skipped, but I kept my voice neutral. "What are you suggesting?" "I want you to come work for me. Head of strategy. Lead our next phase of expansion. I want your mind, your instincts, your command of execution. And I'll double whatever you're making now." For a moment, I was silent. Double. It wasn't a raise. It was a revolution. "That's a generous offer," I said slowly. "It's a deserved offer," he replied. "And you'd finally be working for someone who sees your worth up front, not after a crisis forces it." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the skyline. For years I'd shown up early, stayed late, taken on the work no one wanted, only to have my ideas filtered through louder voices in nicer suits. I'd been promoted because the firm had no choice, not because they wanted to. And this man, this client, was offering me not just money, but recognition, autonomy, power on my own terms. "Send me the offer," I said at last. "I'll take a look. I think you'll like what you see." After we hung up, I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to feel the moment alone first. The quiet knowledge that I wasn't just being recognized. I was being recruited. I wasn't someone the firm could afford to lose. I was someone they never deserved to keep. The next morning, I printed my resignation letter, signed it with a steady hand, and slid it into a plain envelope. I wore my favorite navy dress. Not to impress, but to make a statement that I was leaving on my own terms, composed and dignified. The hallway buzzed with the usual Monday energy, but as I walked toward HR, conversations quieted and heads turned slightly. Word traveled fast around here, and I didn't need a microphone for people to know what was happening. Denise, the HR director, blinked when she saw me standing at her doorway. "Madison, is everything all right?" I smiled, calm and firm. "I've accepted a new position. Here's my formal resignation. 2 weeks' notice." I handed over the envelope, and she opened it, skimming the contents. Her eyebrows lifted slightly at the compensation package listed from my new employer. "Wow," she muttered. "Double what they're paying you here." I nodded once. "With equity and team leadership included." She looked up and for a moment, her expression softened, not with pity, but with respect. "Good for you," she said. Truly. I spent the next hour boxing up my office. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. I wasn't sneaking out the back door. If anything, I wanted to be seen. A few coworkers stopped by, some offering quiet congratulations, others still stunned by how quickly everything had turned. "You really did it," one of the analysts said, shaking her head. "Blake thought he owned this place. You proved him wrong without even raising your voice." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just smiled and kept working. Then, as I was slipping my laptop into my tote, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your little win. You just got lucky." I didn't need to guess. I stared at the screen for a long second, then typed back slowly. Luck had nothing to do with it. Send. No emojis, no punctuation, just truth. He would read that and stew, which honestly was the bare minimum he deserved. On my way out, I passed by the now vacant office that used to be his. The door was closed, the nameplate already gone. The blinds were drawn, and HR had already packed his belongings over the weekend. It was like he'd been scrubbed from existence. Funny how people who think they're untouchable always go down the fastest. I paused, just for a moment, not to admire the fall, but to absorb the silence it left behind. It was cleansing. By the time I reached the elevator, I could feel the shift. not just in the building, but in myself. For years, I had tolerated the subtle digs, the credit theft, the way men like Blake maneuvered through power like they were entitled to it. But now, for the first time in my career, I had claimed my own space without asking for permission. I hadn't burned the place down. I'd simply outplayed them. And as I stepped into the elevator, head held high, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of everything I actually deserved. 1 year later, I stood in the corner office of a downtown high-rise, looking out over the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass. The nameplate on the door read, Madison Reed, Vice President. Strategic growth. Not assistant, not interim. Just mine, permanent, earned. My calendar was full. My inbox was curated, not crammed. And my team operated like a machine powered by trust and clarity. I was no longer drowning in meaningless meetings or political quicksand. I was building something real. A culture. A team. A place where voices like mine weren't just heard. They were the ones steering the ship. That afternoon, as I wrapped up a meeting with a new global partner, my assistant slipped into the room and handed me a small envelope. Came by courier, she said, curious. I opened it slowly, and inside was a simple business card. Familiar, unimpressive. Blake Thorne. A sticky note was attached. Thought we might reconnect. I'm doing some consulting now. Open to collaborating. I stared at the card for a long second, then dropped it into the recycling bin without a word. There was nothing to say. That chapter wasn't just closed, it had been shredded, burned, and rewritten in my own language. He hadn't just lost a title, he lost relevance. And I'd gained exactly what he once used to gatekeep. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech Leadership panel. I stood backstage in a sharp black suit, listening to the speaker before me. A brilliant engineer recounting how she once got passed over for a project because a male colleague needed the win more. When my turn came, I stepped out under the lights, the room packed with women. Young, seasoned, exhausted, determined. I looked at them and saw every version of myself. The fresh-faced analyst who once stayed late for recognition that never came, the woman who got told she was too direct, too serious, too much, and finally, the one who stopped asking for permission and started setting her own terms. I'm not here because I played nice, I began. I'm here because I learned how to play smart. There's a difference? Heads nodded. Pens scratched paper. I told them how strategy beats noise, how calm is power, how dignity is not the opposite of ambition, it's the foundation of it. I didn't mention names. I didn't have to. Anyone who had ever been passed over for the promotion they earned, seen their work credited to someone louder, or been called difficult for setting a boundary, they already knew. After the panel, a young woman approached me, nervous, hopeful. Can I ask how you knew when to leave? I smiled. When I realized staying would cost me more than walking away ever would. She nodded slowly, holding on to the words like oxygen. Before she left, she said, "We've been talking about you on Slack. What you did, how you did it. You made it feel possible." I watched her disappear into the crowd and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not even satisfaction. Something stronger. Legacy. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and opened my journal for the first time in months. I wrote one sentence: I didn't want revenge. I wanted visibility. And when they wouldn't give it to me, I built a platform of my own. Outside, the city pulsed with life. My phone buzzed with opportunities I chose carefully. I didn't hustle for a seat at anyone's table anymore. I owned the room. And if there's one thing I know now, truly know, it's this: you don't have to raise your voice to make an impact. You just have to raise your standards, and never, ever hand your worth to someone too small to hold it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your head held high. Not every battle needs noise. Some victories come in silence, through grace, clarity, and unshakable self-worth. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to wait your turn, remember this: your value isn't up for debate. If this message hit home, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more real, powerful truths.